I am Courtney. I founded with my partner Can I Play That in 2018. It's been about 2 years. It was November 2018 that we launched. And in that time, we have somehow become the biggest source for accessibility information in the games industry, both for disabled gamers and for developers. We set out to mainly be a hub for disabled gamers to find out, as our name says, can I play that? Because so often you'll spend money on a game if you're disabled only to find that you can't play it because there aren't the features or settings that you need. So we started with that in mind, and quickly developers picked up on what we were doing. So we have kind of a 50-50 audience of developers and players, and I'm really proud of the fact that a lot of our work has influenced game design and improvements, patches, just general knowledge about accessibility for developers in the industry. And yeah, so I'm here to answer any questions that you have. And my dog, as Stacy mentioned, will probably pop up because she likes attention. So I am ready.
Great. We wait for the questions to come in. What would be your sort of top one wish that you wished every game would include in terms of accessibility?
Probably, I have two.
Okay.
My personal, for my own needs, would be robust subtitle and captioning options, like font size, scaling, background, opacity. But I think probably the most far-reaching one that all games, at least console games, could implement to help the most players would be full controller remapping.
Okay, I think that are two fairly good ones. So question, hi, accessibility matters a lot to me in my profession as a UI designer. I've helped a lot with things like color blindness and larger font sizes, but would love to do more. What do you think developers miss out on the most?
Honestly, I think the most important things developers can do is interact with the community and learn specifically what players need, and because there's really nobody better to tell you what they need to be able to access a game, to be able to enjoy a game, than the person trying to access it. But yeah, a lot of the common complaints are there's either limited control schemes or no remapping. Both are important. I mean, control schemes are nice to have options to pick from, but if you really want that sweet spot of allowing the most people possible to play your game, you need full remapping. And yeah, as you said, larger font sizes. Customizable UI is also helpful because in a lot of games, especially more modern ones, as we get into the super photorealistic graphics, it seems that UI is becoming smaller and smaller, and it's, you have to kind of lean in and what does that say? So, if you have options to increase the size of your UI or text in your UI, what is that? Outer Worlds released a patch that really, really did that quite well with a full scaling, not only text, but the size of the entire interface.
Okay. So keep the questions coming through for those that have just joined us. We've got Courtney Craven from Can I Play That? So you're US-based, Courtney. Do you help games companies from around the world? Are you focused US-based?
Yeah, we have... sorry, go ahead.
So I was going to say, what would companies need to do to contract with you guys to help?
We don't really do contracts. We are mostly a journalism-focused organization, so a lot of our resources come from just reading our content. We have a full set of accessibility guides that were written by disabled players as opposed to someone well-versed in, in accessibility practices. So if you can read those and find out like super deep dive specific, this is what colorblind players need, this is what deaf players need, this is what I believe we have a cognitive guide too, which is probably one of the more difficult areas to get into because it's such a broad topic because cognitive needs are different for everybody. But as far as how we can help developers, we are available to everybody around the world, and you can reach us on Twitter if you have a specific question. We have a site or a site-wide handle, our site Twitter, and then all of the staff, the editors, all have individual ones, and we can all be reached, and we're always happy to answer questions. We all have a lot to say about about various topics, so.
And Can I Play That are featured in our booths, so you can go into the expo booths and register your interest, and Can I Play That team will receive your details to contact you. So Meg has said that she really loves what you do. It's absolutely invaluable to those of us wanting to make our games more accessible. Are there any games that you feel that have been really well done in terms of accessibility?
Yes. There are a lot of really great studios, both indie and AAA, that have really been pushing the envelope in accessibility. I personally don't get a chance to play a lot of indie games just because I'm mainly a console player and my time is limited because I have a full-time job in addition to Can I Play That? So I play what is going to have the most appeal to our audience. But a lot of indie games have really done well. I know Eagle Island is one. I believe they had exceptional blind accessibility. Hyperdot was another one that was pretty widely accessible. In terms of the big games, obviously, The Last of Us 2 was the biggest release. They had over, I think it was 100 options just in the accessibility menus to allow players to customize their experience. And if anyone's on Twitter, you can find Sightless Combat. He's a sightless player, and he was actually able, with minimal sighted help, to play through The Last of Us 2 in its entirety. So they have done really well. And the game that put Can I Play That kind of on the map as the go-to source was our coverage of Gears 5. And that will answer the happiest accessibility moment when playing a game question too. That was one, Gears 5, I turned it on and I cried when I when I saw the options, because that was the first time. My partner and I had been doing this since 2014. And when Gears 5 came out last year, that was the first time that I had been able to go into a settings menu and see literally everything we had been asking for the previous 5 years included in that settings menu. So that was, yeah.
It just has such a profound impact on people, doesn't it, to do these things. So Michelle asks, what would be the best approach to ask your own company if they could make more games accessible, say controller mapping or otherwise?
I honestly, I think it sells. You know, the best-selling games of the last couple of years, all of them have also been some of the most widely accessible. If you look at statistics from Ubisoft, they have a lot of accessibility info, usage reports available for viewing, and some of their best-selling titles have also been some of the most accessible. And it's really a testament to, if you put in the effort, you open it up to a whole new player base. And in the US, disabled people have disposable income in the trillions. So if you give us what we need, we're going to give you our money. So and I know it comes down to money, right? It's about budget. And if you want to bring in a whole new player base, you need accessibility. And in the end, it'll really pay off, because it not only increases your audience, but it increases loyalty. Because if people know that you are designing with them in mind, they're going to be excited about what you're doing.
And people, disability can come at any point in your life. So you could be a lifelong gamer and something happen, and a source of fun and escape is cut off from you. So I think it's really important that we all keep up with and make everything as inclusive as possible.
Yeah. We've gotten a couple. Oh, sorry.
No, you go.
We've gotten a couple emails from people that have become disabled later in life, and from various things, whether it's mobility, losing motor control, losing sight. And the messages have said, I thought that I was going to have to give this up. And finding you guys and learning what games I can still play because of the focus areas that you guys have, I know now that I can play games. So thank you for letting me know what games I can play, what games to not waste money on, and so it's always nice to get messages.
Yeah,
like that.
That's lovely.
You're right. People do think that they've lost something that they love if they can't access it anymore.
So Margaret Patel says, I'm working on a speech therapy app in the near future. How can games be more accessible for people with autism spectrum disorders and related mental disabilities? I myself have Asperger's, but everyone in the spectrum is different.
I also am on the spectrum. I wasn't diagnosed until last year, but it was one of those aha moments, like, everything makes sense now. But cognitive accessibility and touching on things in that area, it's really, I don't know if I want to say it's harder to design for cognitive accessibility or easier, because the area of cognitive accessibility is so broad that it's hard to pinpoint. With deaf accessibility, hard of hearing accessibility, there's a set list of features that players need to access a game, right? With blind accessibility, it's a little harder because there's a spectrum of low vision blindness. But with cognitive, it might be easier to design for cognitive accessibility because it does pull from every other area that does have more concrete needs. Simplified controls or controller remapping, so a player can have that muscle memory. And it's it's one of those things, like trying to go from playing on Xbox to Switch. The buttons are backwards if you switch back and forth. When they implemented their system-wide controller remapping, I actually started enjoying playing on Switch because I wasn't constantly hitting the wrong button because there's stop. So the best advice I would give there is, talk with people in that community, talk with other players on the spectrum or players that have those disabilities, and study the other areas of accessibility, because every other area is going to feed cognitive accessibility.
Good advice, thank you. So Agata asks, do we have any data on how many players are actively using accessibility settings? Something like this could be used to convince dev teams to think about this in a more detail and promote accessibility in games.
I don't have any specific data on that, but I can tell you who might. Ian Hamilton is
a great guy.
He's an awesome guy. He's the data guy. He will likely have some numbers for you, and I'm going to butcher his name because French is the one language I can't do, but David Tisserand from Ubisoft. He also shares quite regularly information, obviously just from Ubisoft titles, but you can take it and apply it to, whatever.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, Stacy.
There we go. And Vida asks, thank you so much for doing this. I'm a community manager, and my question is, how do we as community social media managers improve the conversation around accessibility in our games? Accessibility discussions often feel sidelined when compared to talking about other selling points of games like gameplay, story, graphics, and so on.
We actually have recently been talking about this a lot because, with some of the super, super big titles coming out later this year and with next gen games, a lot of the marketing has not touched on accessibility. So you're right, that is a difficult thing to do. So first, I will say we have guides and articles and even a video about that on Can I Play That? I will link those in the chat.
Thank
later.
you.
But really, and this is tricky because there is so much toxicity. The Women in Games organization has to exist because it's difficult to be a woman or female identified person in this industry. It's that hard to be disabled in this industry too, because there's so much toxicity aimed at us, because there's always that the angry gamer. You're going to ruin games. Well, if it's an option, it's optional, isn't it?
Exactly.
We haven't ruined anything yet. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. But I think that the next important step that publicity PR can take is doing accessibility focused press releases and promotion, or even just making your content accessible. We have a guide for that also. It's in our guide section, how to make materials, press materials, ads, all that kind of stuff accessible. But really just devoting a little bit of that time to the disabled community would go a long way in making players feel more welcome than we might otherwise be, because of the sum of the player base.
It's all about inclusivity, isn't it? And it's like you say, there's an option there. If you don't need that option, don't press it. But
exactly,
I think that without having those diverse voices within the organisation and within your player base, you don't get to walk in that person's shoes as to how they play, and that's why it's so important to have diverse people within your organisation, because that's how the world is. That's what represented you. If you want to talk money, that's how you make more money.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've just posted in there a link to your accessibility reference guides. So Elise asks, I'm a user researcher and I was wondering, how do we find ways to playtest games to help teams make the best choices in terms of accessibility?
You might be surprised to find, particularly on Twitter, but just in any community in general, the community of disabled gamers is huge. It is massive. And if you want, if you're on Twitter, you can mention us, mention any of the editors, mention the Can I Play That handle. And if you are looking for a specific set of players, we would gladly help connect you with members of the community that would be happy to do that work.
So Charlie saying, Courtney, I'm part of my own research looks at how dyslexia impacts gameplay. So I'm really interested to hear about how you're also giving cognitive and SPLD's focus. I'm dyslexic and I can't even say that, Charlie. Oh, give me a word I can pronounce, Charlie. Number dyslexic, thank you.
Same, me
there
too.
We go.
That is unfortunately probably because our site is largely writing based. It is not an area that we have a lot of info on. But again, honestly, if you're trying to improve accessibility, the best thing you can do is be active on Twitter and join in discussions, or even just observe discussions being had on accessibility. I know Cherry Thompson used to be independent, now works for Ubisoft. They do some wonderful tweet threads about their own needs, which often focus on dyslexia and cognitive accessibility and other. I mean, they're kind of an all-around expert, so they would be a good one to learn from. But aside from the big names in accessibility that are on Twitter, you really can find, or we can help you connect with anybody that has a specific need that you want to address. If you can't find the coverage from one of us or on our site, we're always happy to help you meet other people that can.
So what are your go-to games to play, Courtney?
My go-to games. I've played Dragon Age, and there's my dog whine at me. I have played Dragon Age through probably 4 or 5 times. I went to school for writing, so I'm a fiction writer, not professionally, but hopefully one day. So I tend to be drawn to games that are very story rich or have the characters that are going to make me cry when they do things, And it helps that EA, BioWare have really done well with my own needs for accessibility, deaf and hard of hearing accessibility.
Great. Okay. Same as Dragon Age. So Emily says it's probably one of my favourite series overall on there. And what are you looking for with the new consoles coming up with up and coming games? Because we'll be starting going into development there. What's your kind of top tips for developers that are thinking of games in terms of accessibility? Sometimes comes in sort of later, and then it's harder to retrofit things in.
Most important thing you can do is start early with accessibility and development. Shell Little had a good little quote from our conversation we were having on Twitter: "Baked in, not caked on."
That's good.
Yeah. So if you start early, it's much easier to implement it than it is if you try and put it on as a Band-Aid after launch. Because it's a lot easier you're not going to break things if you do it at the start instead of trying to go in and make your UI scalable once your game is launched, And it's easier to implement feedback that way also. You can play test it, you can be active in the community. Yeah.
The pet room was earlier.
Yes. She did not want to participate.
She just wants to join in with your spot.
Yeah, she wants. It's all about her, and yeah.
Cool.
So, in terms of next gen consoles, I would love to see from PlayStation specifically. I would like to see them support the XAC.
What's that?
I'm sorry. What's that?
Yeah. What's XAC?
The Xbox Adaptive Controller.
Great, thank you.
Because it kind of serves as a hub to let players use whatever peripherals or switches that they need in order to access a game.
Okay.
I remember with PS4, our mobility editor, Grant Stoner, was a lot of us at the site were super, super excited about The Last of Us 2 because we had heard about how many accessibility options it was launching with and that it was going to be the most accessible game ever. And our media editor, Steve Saylor, and I both agreed that it was the most accessible video game we'd ever played, and we did a rave review of it. We did a video that got like 100,000 views, which was wild. And then our mobility editor was also excited for it, and he turned it on to find that he couldn't even play it because they didn't allow for anything other than the DualShock controller.
Right.
He was not able to use that, so he couldn't access the game. So I guess that brings me to my top tip. More options, the better. The more ways you can give any player to access a game, to control your game, to interact with your game, it's going to not only better, it's going to be better for the players, but it's going to be better for everybody because, I mean, all options really, and Sherry Thompson has said this multiple times, and I agree with them. All options are accessibility options, right? From the brightness slider. If a game launches and it's too dark, without that brightness slider, you wouldn't be able to play it, right? Whether you have a disability or not,
Yeah.
you have those options. So if you take that approach and stop separating it as, you know, special access, and just think of accessibility as general access to your game, and shoot for providing as many options and choices as possible, I think you're going to be able to reach many more players than you would otherwise.
Definitely. And I think when we were discussing the talk for here, it's not just games, it's conferences like this. So, you know, Courtney and the guys that I was talking to, it was all about getting the closed captions in and working towards that. So it was definitely a learning for me along when we were sorting this out. So I really appreciate Courtney coming in and joining and doing the AMA. So I think that's it on the questions that have come through. Meg says she agrees it's like having inclusiveness is an afterthought. So I would encourage all of you, no matter what stage you are at in your careers or where you're at, ask the companies that you're with what's the strategy for accessibility and inclusiveness, and direct them towards Courtney and Can I Play That for references and the best practice and the ways to go. Thank you, Courtney, for your time and joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was nice to be here.
I really enjoyed that. Goodbye and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everybody.